Good evening, children of the night. The signal is strong, the air is cold. I am Damien Tao. Tonight, we drift back to rural China, to a time when the mountains still whispered secrets and the graves still held their grudges. Let me tell you about the grave tree. In our culture, graves are sacred thresholds. What grows upon them is not just wood and leaf, it is memory made flesh. Our story takes place in the 1980s, in a mountain village where superstition and soil were equally deep. There lived a man they called Bold He, 30 years old, built like an ox, with a reputation for fearing neither ghost nor God. In his youth, Bold He walked night roads where others dared not tread. Through fields where the murdered were buried in unmarked earth. Through woods where lanterns floated without bearers. Nothing ever touched him. The villagers said even ghosts respect strength. Even spirits know who not to haunt. Late that summer, Bold He, his hoe handle, snapped clean in two. He needed wood, straight, hard, uncompromising wood. That afternoon, he took his cleaver and climbed the mountain behind the village. The trees there grew wild and crooked, shaped by wind that never stopped blowing. He searched for hours, but every branch was gnarled, every trunk twisted. The mountain was refusing him, though he didn't know it yet. Frustration crept in. Bold He decided he would settle for anything. Just grab whatever wood he could find and be done with it. That is when he saw it. An old grave mound forgotten in the weeds. The tombstone was weathered beyond reading. The characters had been swallowed by time. But rising from that grave was a tree, perfectly straight, impossibly straight, as if it had been measured by some otherworldly carpenter. Bold He approached, his fingers reaching out before his mind could question. The trunk was the perfect thickness. The wood felt dense, almost alive. He knocked on it. The sound was hollow and solid at once, like knocking on a coffin lid, like rapping on bone. He smiled. Perfect. As he raised the cleaver, a voice shattered the silence, trembling, ancient, desperate. You cannot cut it. You cannot cut it. Bold He spun around. An old man emerged from the undergrowth, hunched over, dressed in rags that might have once been clothes. His bare feet left prints in the dirt that looked too deep. The old man's voice cracked like dry leaves. You cannot cut it. You cannot. Please, the pleading in his tone was visceral, animal. Bold He studied him. The old man's eyes were wrong, too bright, too focused for someone so frail. Bold He asked, "Old-timer, why can't I cut it?" The old man's hand rose, shaking violently, pointing at the grave with a crooked finger. When a tree grows from a grave, it means a wronged soul is crying beneath the earth. The tree feeds on resentment. It grows straight because hatred has no curves. It absorbs the rage from the bones below, draws it up through the roots like poison. The old man's voice grew more frantic. The spirit uses this tree to purge its sins, to let go of vengeance. You cut it down, and where does that fury go? Bold He laughed. Not a kind laugh, a dismissive one. Old man, what era are we living in? Still believing in ghosts and curses. When people die, the light goes out. That is it. No souls, no spirits, just meat and bone returning to dirt. This is just a tree. Nothing more. The old man began to wail, slapping his thighs, beating his chest to disaster. Disaster is coming. You fool. You arrogant fool. Bold He ignored him. 3 clean strikes. The tree fell. The crack was sharp, final, like something breaking inside the earth itself. The old man stood frozen, hands covering his face. Through his fingers, Bold He could hear him whispering prayers, ancient prayers, prayers in a dialect that hadn't been spoken in generations. Bold He hoisted the tree trunk onto his shoulder and began his descent. Behind him, the old man's voice faded into the growing darkness. The wind picked up, carrying a smell like opened graves. That night, Bold, he carved the tree into a perfect hoe handle. The wood was stubborn. It fought the blade, but he persisted, and by midnight, it was done. He fitted the handle to the hoe blade. It fit perfectly, too perfectly, as if it had been waiting for this union, as if it had been grown for this exact purpose. Bold, he went to sleep satisfied. His son, Little Plum, slept in the next room, 7 years old, healthy, loud, the kind of boy who laughed easily and cried rarely. But around 3 in the morning, the hour when spirits walk freely, Little Plum began to scream. Not the scream of nightmares, the scream of someone seeing something they shouldn't. Bold, he rushed in. His son was sitting up, rigid as a corpse, pointing at the corner. There is someone there. There is someone there. Father, can't you see her? Bold, he saw nothing, just shadows and moonlight. But his son's terror was real. The boy's pupils were dilated, his skin cold as clay. She is smiling at me. Father, why is she smiling like that? Her mouth is too wide. Her mouth won't close. The boy began to convulse. His body jerked with movements that weren't his own. His fingers bent backwards. His neck twisted at angles that made Bold his stomach turn. Bold, he held his son, but it was like holding a puppet on strings pulled by invisible hands. The boy's voice changed, became older, feminine, wrong. Through his son's mouth came a woman's voice, ancient and hollow. You took my tree, now I take your son. Fair trade, don't you think? Little Plum collapsed, breathing but unconscious, his pulse thin as spider silk. Bold, his hands shook as he checked his son for injury. No marks, no wounds, but the boy wasn't coming back. For the first time in his life, Bold, he felt fear, real fear, the kind that makes your bones feel hollow. He carried Little Plum to the village doctor, but the doctor found nothing wrong. The boy's body functioned. His heart beat, his lungs drew air, but his eyes stayed closed, and his spirit stayed elsewhere. Days passed. Little Plum lay in bed like a breathing corpse. He aged before Bold his eyes. His young skin turned sallow. His hair began to gray at the roots. Bold, he remembered the old man on the mountain, the warning he'd ignored. Arrogance became guilt. Guilt became terror. On the 7th night, Bold, he couldn't take it anymore. He returned to the mountain, to the grave, carrying incense and spirit money. These are offerings in our culture, ways to appease the dead. When he reached the grave, he fell to his knees. The stump of the tree he'd cut stood like an accusation. Black viscous liquid still seeped from the wound. Bold, he lit the incense. The smoke rose straight up, then suddenly twisted, forming shapes in the air, faces, hands, writhing bodies. He spoke to the darkness. I was wrong. I am a fool. I beg you, honored spirit, release my son. Take my life instead if you must. The wind stopped. The forest went silent. Then from the grave mound itself came a voice, not through the air, through the ground, through his bones. You have 3 days. Replant a tree on this grave. Not just any tree, a cypress sapling from the temple grounds, planted in soil mixed with your blood. Tend it until it grows strong enough to hold my rage again. Do this, and your son will wake. Fail, and he becomes mine forever. Bold, he didn't hesitate. At dawn, he went to the temple. The monks were suspicious. Why would this man who'd never prayed suddenly want a sacred cypress sapling? But when he explained, when they saw the desperation in his eyes, they relented. They gave him a young cypress, roots wrapped in blessed cloth. Back at the grave, Bold, he used his knife to cut his palm deep. The blood came thick and dark. He mixed it with the soil, kneading it like dough. He planted the cypress where the old tree had stood, patted the bloody soil around its roots, whispered promises to a spirit he'd mocked just days before. Every day he came to water it, not with well water, with water he'd prayed over, water from the temple, water that cost him most of his savings. The villagers thought he'd lost his mind. Bold he, the skeptic, the mocker of superstition, tending a grave like a devoted son, they whispered, They gossiped. He didn't care. On the third night, just as darkness fell, Little Plum's eyes opened. He gasped like a drowning man breaking the surface. His mother screamed with joy. The boy remembered nothing. The 7 days were blank in his mind. But his hair stayed gray in patches, and sometimes when he slept, he whimpered about a woman with a smile too wide. Old, he kept his promise. Every week for the rest of his life, he visited that grave, watered the tree, burned incense, apologized to the spirit he'd violated. He never learned who was buried there. The tombstone stayed illegible, but he didn't need to know. Respect doesn't require names. Now, let me tell you about Chef Ko. This happened in the same village around the same time. Different man, different mistake. But the lesson is identical. Chef Ko ran a small restaurant. Nothing fancy. Noodles, dumplings, occasional meat dishes. He was good with a cleaver and better with spices. One autumn evening, a customer came in asking for hedgehog. In Chinese cuisine, this was considered medicinal. Good for the blood, they said. Chef Ko didn't have any, but he knew where to find them. The mountain behind the village. Hedgehogs nested there in the rocks. That night, Chef Ko took a sack and a stick and climbed the mountain. The moon was thin, barely a sliver, the kind of night when things move in the shadows. He found a hedgehog den quickly. Too quickly. The animals barely resisted. They seemed to be waiting for him, which should have been his first warning. Chef Ko grabbed the largest one, pure white. Unusual. Hedgehogs are typically brown or gray, but white meant albino rare, probably more valuable. As he stuffed it in the sack, he noticed something else. A single quill, longer than the others, glowed faintly. He plucked it, put it in his pocket. A curiosity, a trophy. Back at the restaurant, he killed the hedgehog with practiced efficiency. Skinned it, gutted it. The meat was pale, almost translucent. Strange, but he'd cooked stranger things. He prepared it braised with herbs. The customer ate heartily, paid well, and left satisfied. Chef Ko pocketed the money and forgot about the whole thing. But that night, Chef Ko had a dream. Not a dream, too vivid for that. Too real. He stood in a courtyard he'd never seen before. Ancient architecture, red lanterns. The smell of sandalwood, and before him, an old man in white robes, face contorted with fury. The old man's voice boomed like thunder. You killed my granddaughter. 800 years I've protected my family. 800 years of cultivation. And you cooked her. In our folklore, certain animals can cultivate spiritual power over centuries, become almost human, almost divine. The white immortal is a hedgehog spirit. Revered, protected. Chef Ko fell to his knees in the dream. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. His voice was small, terrified. The old man's rage was palpable. His eyes glowed with power that made the air shimmer. Ignorance is no excuse. My granddaughter was about to transcend. One more century, and she would have become fully immortal. You stole that from her, cooked it away, sold it to a glutton for pocket change. Do you understand what you've done? Chef Ko couldn't speak. His throat was closed with fear. In the dream, he felt the weight of centuries crushing down on him. The old man raised his hand. I could destroy you, turn your bones to powder, make you suffer for decades before death takes you. But the hand lowered. The rage didn't diminish, but control returned. But you acted out of ignorance, not malice. You didn't know what she was. So I will give you one chance. One chance to make this right. The old man's voice was cold steel. You took the glowing quill. That was her spirit essence. Her 800 years of cultivation condensed into physical form. Return it to her grave before dawn. Build her a proper shrine. Offer incense and apologies every month for the rest of your miserable life. Do this, and I will not destroy you. Fail, and you will know suffering beyond imagination. Your blood will boil boil in your veins. Your skin will peel like old paper. Chef Ko woke up screaming. His wife shook him, asking what was wrong, but he couldn't explain. The words stuck in his throat like bones. He rushed to his coat. The pocket. The quill was there, but it had changed. It was no longer glowing. It looked dead brittle, as if it were fading. Chef Ko didn't waste time. He knew where he'd found the hedgehog. He grabbed a shovel, incense, and ran to the mountain while darkness still held. The den was exactly where he remembered. But now in the gray light before dawn, he saw what he'd missed. Small offerings, flowers, coins. People had been leaving tributes here. This wasn't just a hedgehog burrow. It was a shrine. The locals knew. They'd been protecting this place, and he, ignorant city chef, had violated it. Chef Ko dug a small hole near the den's entrance. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the shovel. Dawn was coming. The sky was lightening. He placed the quill in the hole. As it touched the earth, it seemed to pulse once. Faintly, like a dying heartbeat trying to revive. He covered it with soil, patting it down gently, then lit 3 incense sticks and stuck them in the ground. The smoke rose straight and true. Chef Ko kowtowed, pressed his forehead to the rocky ground until it bled, apologized to the spirit he'd murdered, begged forgiveness from beings he'd never believed in. The sun broke the horizon. The deadline passed. Chef Ko held his breath, waiting for the punishment the old man had promised. Nothing happened. No boiling blood, no peeling skin, just morning birdsong and the smell of mountain flowers. The spirits had accepted his offering, but Chef Ko didn't leave. He spent the entire day building a proper shrine, stone upon stone, until his hands bled and his back screamed. He carved a simple tablet from wood. No fancy characters, just 3 words: White Immortal Shrine. Crude but heartfelt. From that day forward, Chef Ko came to the shrine every month, burned incense, left offerings, sometimes fruit, sometimes rice, sometimes just water. The villagers noticed. At first they whispered, Chef Ko's gone mad, worshipping hedgehogs now. But then they remembered their own grandparents doing the same. The shrine became a local landmark again. Other people started leaving offerings. The old ways, half forgotten, began to return. Chef Ko's restaurant changed too. He stopped serving wild game. No more hedgehog, no more rare creatures. Only farm-raised meat. Only common vegetables. Some customers complained, where is the excitement? Where is the exotic dishes? But Chef Ko was firm. Those days are over. Eat elsewhere if you want that. Business dropped at first. Then it stabilized. Then it grew. People came for the honesty, for food made by a man who'd learned respect the hard way. One night, years later, Chef Ko had another dream. The same courtyard. But this time, the old man was smiling. You have kept your word. The old man's voice was warm now, like autumn sunlight. My granddaughter rests peacefully. Her essence has merged with the mountain. She cannot complete her cultivation. That chance is gone forever, but she is not suffering. Thanks to your devotion, she has found peace. The old man bowed. Actually bowed to a mortal. This is rare. In our culture, when an elder bows, it means profound respect earned. You were ignorant, but you learned. You were careless, but you changed. Continue as you are, and you will live a long life. My family will watch over your family. Chef Ko woke with tears on his face. Not tears of fear this time. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of second chances. He kept the shrine until the day he died. Even when he was old and sick, his children carried him up the mountain so he could light the incense himself. His restaurant thrived for 3 generations. His grandchildren run it still. They keep a small altar in the back, hidden from customers, dedicated to the White Immortal. And they say on quiet nights, when the wind blows just right, you can hear something in the kitchen. Not footsteps exactly, more like the rustling of quills. The grandchildren leave a small bowl of rice out sometimes. In the morning, it is always empty, not eaten, just gone. Taken as offering, accepted. Now, let me bring these stories together. 2 men, 2 violations, 2 chances at redemption. Bold, he cut down a grave tree. Chef Ko killed a sacred creature. Both acted out of ignorance. Neither believed in what they were violating. But here is the critical difference between my world and yours. In the West, you have insurance. Lawyers, systems of material justice. In rural China, in those times, we had something else. We had the understanding that not everything can be seen, not everything can be measured. But it is real nonetheless. The spirits in these stories were not mindless monsters. They had histories, families, emotions. They were wronged and they responded. But they also showed mercy when confronted with genuine remorse. This is what we mean by the word Ling, spirit, soul, the animating force that exists in all things, trees, animals, even stones if they're old enough. In the West, you might call this animism, paganism, primitive belief. But I ask you, is it more primitive than thinking everything is just dead matter, just atoms without meaning? Bold, his son recovered, but he never forgot. The gray patches in his hair stayed until the day he died, a permanent reminder of the 7 days he spent elsewhere. He refused to walk past graveyards, even as an adult, even in broad daylight. He knew something that others only suspected. Death is not the end of consciousness. Little Plum, they called him, but there was nothing sweet about what he'd seen. Sometimes, late at night, he'd wake up and check the corners of his room, looking for the woman with the too wide smile. He never saw her again, but he felt her in certain places, old graves, abandoned houses, places where the veil is thin and the dead press close to the living. Chef Ko's family thrived. His children were healthy, his grandchildren too. The White Immortal's grandfather kept his promise. Protection in exchange for respect. But once, just once, Chef Ko's grandson saw something. He was closing the restaurant late, movement in the corner. A white hedgehog watching him with knowing eyes. The boy froze. The hedgehog didn't move. They watched each other for a long moment. Then the creature turned and walked through the wall, not around it, through it, like walls were suggestions. The grandson told his father. His father smiled and said, "That is good. That means we're still protected. Never forget to maintain the shrine." You see, these stories aren't about punishment. Not really, they're about balance. About reciprocity. You take, you must give. You harm, you must heal. In Chinese philosophy, we have a concept called yuan. It means karmic debt, what you owe to the universe, to other beings, to the forces you've disrupted. Bold, he created yuan when he cut the tree. Chef Ko created yuan when he killed the hedgehog. Both debts had to be paid. Money wouldn't work. Only action, only change. Think about it. The spirits could have killed them, could have taken everything, but they didn't. They issued warnings. They gave chances. They were, in their own way, merciful. Because these spirits had once been alive. They remembered what it was like to make mistakes, to act in ignorance. They understood humanity because they'd been part of it. The grave tree spirit had been wronged in life, probably murdered, buried improperly, left without proper rights. The tree was her only comfort, her only connection to the world. When Bold, he cut it, he severed that connection, left her adrift. Imagine being trapped in darkness for decades with one small thread connecting you to light. Then someone cuts that thread. Of course, she retaliated, wouldn't you? The question isn't why she acted. The question is why she stopped. Why she gave Bold he a chance to make it right. The answer is simple but profound. She saw his remorse. She felt his terror transform into understanding. She recognized genuine change. The White Immortal's grandfather was 800 years old. 8 centuries of watching humans make the same mistakes, kill what they don't understand, destroy what frightens them. But he also saw that some humans can learn, can change. Chef Ko proved this. Went from ignorant killer to devoted protector in the span of one dream. This is the core of Chinese ghost stories. They're not about random violence, not about evil for evil's sake. They're about consequences, about learning, about growing. In Western horror, often the monster just kills. There is no negotiation, no mercy. The babysitter dies, the teenagers die, everyone dies. It is catharsis through violence. In Chinese horror, the ghost kills only if you leave her no choice, if you refuse to acknowledge what you've done, if you persist in disrespect. Give her what she needs, respect, acknowledgement, proper rights, and she'll leave you alone. Often she'll even protect you, like the White Immortal protected Chef Ko's family. This is why these stories matter. They're survival guides disguised as entertainment. Rules for living in a world where you're not the only conscious being. Don't disturb graves. Why? Because the dead deserve rest, but also because disturbing them has consequences. Real ones, measurable ones if you know how to look. Don't kill rare creatures. Why? Because they might be centuries-old spirits, but also because biodiversity matters. Because cruelty creates karma, you'll have to balance eventually. These aren't superstitions. They're encoded ethics. Ways to make people behave properly when there is no police, no courts, no external enforcement. You treat graves with respect because the ghost might kill your son. But in doing so, you're also respecting history, honoring ancestors, maintaining social bonds across generations. You don't hunt sacred animals because spirits will punish you, but in doing so, you're also preserving ecosystems, preventing extinction, maintaining balance. The supernatural and the practical intertwine. This is the genius of these stories. They work on multiple levels simultaneously. He learned not just to fear ghosts. He learned humility. He learned that his strength meant nothing against forces he couldn't see or fight. Chef Ko learned not just to avoid sacred creatures. He learned to question his assumptions, to recognize that profit isn't worth everything, that some things should never be for sale. Both men became better humans. Not through philosophy lectures or moral instruction, through direct experience of consequence, through terror that led to understanding. This is the pedagogical power of horror. You can tell someone not to do something. They might listen, but let them feel the consequences, even vicariously through a story, and they'll never forget. Children who hear these stories learn to be careful, to think before acting, to consider that their actions might have unseen consequences. Adults who remember these stories carry them as invisible guardrails. Even if they don't consciously believe, the stories influence behavior. Make them pause before cutting that tree, before hunting that animal. And sometimes, just sometimes, the pause is enough. Enough to reconsider, enough to choose differently, enough to avoid creating karma that will need balancing. Now you might ask, Damien, do you believe these stories? Do you think spirits really exist? My answer is this: it doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is what these stories do, how they function, what they preserve. They keep graves respected. They keep rare animals alive. They keep people humble. They keep communities connected across time. These are real, tangible benefits. Whether the spirits exist in objective reality or only in cultural consciousness, the effect is the same. Behavior changes. Society functions better. But here is what I will tell you. I've seen things. In my years traveling these rural areas, collecting these stories, I've witnessed events I cannot explain. I've stood at graves where the air feels wrong, where temperature drops 20 degrees in seconds, where electronic devices fail for no reason. I've interviewed people like Bold He and Chef Ko, dozens of them. Their stories are too similar, too specific, to dismiss as fabrication. They describe the same sensations, the same sequence of events, the same types of spirits, across provinces, across decades, without knowing each other. That consistency suggests something, maybe not literal ghosts, but something, some phenomena we don't yet understand, some interaction between consciousness and environment. Science doesn't have all the answers. Not yet. Maybe not ever. There are more things in heaven and earth, as your Shakespeare said, than are dreamt of in our philosophy. So I tell these stories. I collect them, I preserve them, because they contain truth, even if I can't prove what kind of truth. Bold He cypress tree still grows on that mountain. I've seen it, healthy and strong. Locals still leave offerings there, even though they've forgotten why. The White Immortal's shrine has become a minor pilgrimage site. People come from neighboring villages, leave coins, pray for protection. The tradition perpetuates itself, and Chef Ko's restaurant, still thriving, 3 generations later, still refusing to serve wild game, still maintaining that hidden altar in the back room. The grandson I mentioned, the one who saw the white hedgehog, he runs it now. He told me something interesting when I interviewed him last year. He said, "I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I know my grandfather believed, and his belief made him a better man. That is good enough for me." That right there is the essence. Belief as transformation. Fear as education, stories as survival tools. These stories have survived for centuries because they work. They keep people alive. They keep communities functional. They preserve wisdom across generations. In your modern world, you have insurance and lawsuits. We had ghost stories. Both are systems of consequence, ways to make people think twice before acting. But here is the advantage of ghost stories. They address spiritual harm, not just material. They recognize that some violations can't be fixed with money. You can't pay a spirit. You can't sue the dead. You can only change yourself, become better, act with more awareness. That is the only currency that works. Bold He couldn't buy back his son's 7 days, but he could become the kind of man who would never make that mistake again. And he did. Chef Ko couldn't resurrect the White Immortal, but he could dedicate his life to honoring her memory, to protecting what remained of her family. And he did. These are the stories I collect. Not to frighten you, though fear is part of it, but to remind you of something your modern world sometimes forgets. Actions have consequences, not just legal ones, not just social ones, but spiritual ones, karmic ones. Consequences that echo across time and space. Treat the dead with respect. Treat rare creatures with reverence. Treat the natural world with humility. Not because you'll go to hell, but because these relationships matter. The night is deep now. The fog outside my window has thickened. I can barely see the trees beyond. 2 stories tonight. Bold He and the Grave Tree, Chef Ko and the White Immortal, both about respect, both about redemption, both true in the ways that matter. You might think, well, they learned their lessons. Everything worked out, but did it really? Little Plum never fully recovered. Those gray patches, those nightmares. He carried that trauma until he died at 60, still young by modern standards. The White Immortal's 800 years of cultivation gone, destroyed. She can never complete her ascension. She is trapped in a state between beast and divine, forever. Some damage cannot be undone. Some consequences cannot be escaped. Forgiveness is not erasure. This is important to understand. The spirits showed mercy, but mercy doesn't mean everything returns to how it was. It just means you're allowed to continue living with what you've done. This is the harder truth, the one that keeps me awake some nights, that even when you fix your mistakes, the scars remain on you, on those you've harmed. So the real lesson isn't about redemption, it is about prevention. Don't create the karma in the first place. Don't cut the tree. Don't kill the sacred creature. Think before you act. Consider who might be affected. Visible and invisible, present and absent, living and dead. This is what these stories teach. Not just fear of punishment, but cultivation of awareness, development of respect, growth of humility. The world is full of forces you cannot see, cannot control, cannot predict. The wise person acknowledges this. The fool denies it. Bold, he was a fool who became wise. Chef Ko was ignorant but learned quickly. Both survived because they changed, because they listened. The question is, will you listen? Will you learn from their mistakes? Or will you have to make your own? I hope you listen. I hope these stories root themselves in your mind, become part of your decision-making process. A quiet voice that whispers caution when needed, because the world is stranger than you know, older than you imagine, full of connections you cannot see but which exist nonetheless. The incense burns low now. My voice grows hoarse. Outside, something moves in the fog. I choose not to look. This is Damien Tao, signing off from Netherwave Radio. Remember what you've heard tonight. Respect the graves, honor the sacred, think before you take. Subscribe, so you don't miss the warning when the spirits rise again. Leave your own stories in the comments. I'm always listening. And when you walk home tonight, in the dark, past the places where the dead sleep, remember Bold He. Remember Chef Ko. Remember that some debts can only be paid in changed behavior. Sleep carefully, children of the night. The veil is thin tonight. But if you've listened well, if you've learned respect, you have nothing to fear. The broadcast ends, but the stories continue. They always do, passed from mouth to ear, generation to generation, keeping us safe in the dark.